if you want to know something about Terry Preckwinkle, and if you go onto your email and look under here of all the incredible things that she has been doing over the last 20-some years, and now has put a cap on the top of it by being the first woman to be president of the Cook County Commissioners. And I think back to when New Trier Township was formed, the first supervisor was also a woman. So you can see what we women do. But anyway, Tony is a person of integrity, forward-thinking ideas, and the need to transform county government into a world-class institution of the people of Cook County could be proud. She has been a high school teacher in Chicago. She has run nonprofit organizations. Is that me? Sorry. And she ran an improbable campaign against the political establishment and was elected 4th Ward Alderman in 1991. And from there, she is now president of our Cook County Commissioners. Ms. Preckwinkle, I would like to welcome you.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Thank you very much for inviting me. As you heard, I spent almost 20 years being a local elected official, so I want to commend and congratulate all the good people who are here today and who have committed themselves to public service in the same way that I did in the city of Chicago. I want to acknowledge before I begin, Pat, where's Pat? All right, this is Pat Carey, who's on our staff in the Bureau of Economic Development. He has the honor and distinction of working with people all across the county and being part of our outreach team, so I'm very grateful for his presence today. Where's Pam? Pam Lulick is an old friend of mine of 30 years who was good enough to take me around before we officially started today and kind of introduce me to people, so thank you, Pam. You know, what I usually say is that government at whatever level has two obligations, and that's to deliver good service and to do that as effectively and efficiently as possible. That's what we've tried to do in Cook County. We've had 4 basic tenets. We were going to try to be fiscally responsible, bring in innovative leadership, be transparent and accountable, and improve services. So those are the principles that have guided us from the very beginning. I'm proud of what we've been able to accomplish. We overwhelmingly passed 2 budgets in a single year, actually in 9 months. We instituted performance management to demand more accountability, both from our operations and our employees. We focused on public safety reform. We've worked to strengthen our healthcare system, while at the same time reducing the subsidy from county government. In short, we launched a campaign to reinvent Cook County government. Thank you. Our first step was to try to put our financial house in order. So if you think back to December of 2010, we walked in the door. We were at the beginning of the first quarter because Cook County, for reasons that are inexplicable to me, begins its fiscal year December 1st. Not January 1st, not July 1, December 1st. Anyway, so we walked in the door. The first quarter had already begun. There was no budget, no preliminary budget, nothing. So we had to create a budget in 2 months and then get it passed. So we did that. And let me just tell you that was difficult because we faced a $487 million gap in our $3 billion budget. So basically $500 million that we had to figure out how we were going to make up, what cuts we were going to make, how we were going to close that gap. $487 million, kind of daunting. In our first budget, we also committed to roll back the remainder of the Stroger sales tax increase. As you'll recall, during Todd Stroger's 4-year term, the sales tax was increased from 75 cents to $1.75 out of $100 spent. And before I came in office, 50 cents of that was rolled back. We still had 50 cents left. So what we committed to do in that first budget was to roll back the rest of the sales tax increase, half, a quarter of it this year and a quarter of it by the end of this year. So by 2013, all of the Stroger sales tax increase will be gone. It will be rolled back. I made that promise on the campaign trail. I said it's bad for our businesses that have to compete, particularly here at the edge of the county. You have to compete with, Lake, Will, DuPage, McHenry, wherever you are at the edge of Cook County. And it's a disadvantage for our businesses. But it's also very bad for working families. Sales taxes are regressive. Our second budget, we faced a smaller deficit, $315 million, but in a way it was more difficult to handle because we'd already done pretty much the easy things. We picked the low-hanging fruit. In fact, in this year's budget, less than 1% of the budget is one-time fixes, 1%. Mainly what we did is make structural changes, and unfortunately, the biggest part of that was to reduce our workforce. That was one of the toughest parts of my job. As I said, I had no illusions that this was going to be difficult, but I didn't imagine that when I walked in the door, I'd be putting 1,000 people out of work in the first year. And I know that most of those people are ordinary, hardworking folks, and it's been very difficult to accept that fact. The savings that we ensured by restructuring, however, saved the taxpayers $800 million, and the past two budgets reaffirm my commitment to being fiscally responsible. It's a commitment that I'm determined to keep throughout my tenure in this office. But it's not enough simply to cut government. You have to rethink the way it works. And as I've said, you have to be not only fiscally responsible, but you have to try to improve the quality of services. After being elected, I asked a diverse group of business, civic, and community leaders to come together, led by the Civic Consulting Alliance, an organization that some of you may know. It grew out of the Civic Federation and the Commercial Club, and basically it provides pro bono assistance to government at all levels. And they come in, depending on your needs, and provide you with not only their own pro bono staff, but pro bono staff that they recruit from law firms, from accounting firms, wherever you need help. And they have been tremendous assistance to us. Actually, we believe that all told, the Civic Consulting Alliance, through its own staff efforts or through pro bono assistance they brought to us, have saved the county $5 million. One of the first things we did with the support and assistance of the Civic Consulting Alliance is put together a performance management initiative. We call it our STAR initiative, Set Targets, Achieve Results. We're holding all agencies, including the President's Office, accountable by requiring the preparation of a quarterly report that tells what the measurable goals are and our plans to meet those goals. Now, this is pretty basic. You ask people to get together, figure out what is it you're really trying to do, and how are you going to measure your progress. But it had never been done before in Cook County. And what we tried to do was put people together in subject areas. One of the difficulties in managing county government is that in addition to our Board of Commissioners and me, the President of the county, we have 11 other separately elected officials, 11 others. So in most, the city of Chicago, where I'm from and spent 20 years as an alderman, aldermen were elected, that's the legislative body, and then there were 3 people who were elected citywide, the treasurer, the clerk, and the mayor. But as I said, in Cook County, there are 11 separately elected officials. So it's not only the judiciary, but the sheriff and the state's attorney and the assessor and the treasurer and the clerk of the court and the clerk, 3 members of the board of review, did I say the assessor? Anyway, it's 11 people. So we put people together by subject areas. We said the finance and administration people need to work together. The property and taxation people need to work together. We need to look at the healthcare system, economic development, and I just missed one. But in any case, we put people together by subject area and said, look, you all sit down, figure out what you're trying to do and how we're going to measure your progress in doing it. So the property and taxation people said, look, for the first time, we're going to try to get the property tax bills on time. We haven't done this in more than a decade, okay? This is the basic foundation, right? Let's get the bills out on time. In the public safety arena, the 5 actors in public safety got together and said 70% of the people in our jail are there for nonviolent offenses. 70%. Let's figure out how we can safely reduce our jail population, because it costs us $143 a day to keep somebody in jail. And some of those people are there for low-level drug offenses, or the things that people do to get quick money for their drugs, like shoplifting or prostituting themselves. So we got people together in these subject areas to think about what they were doing and then try to figure out how we should measure their progress. And again, they set the goals themselves. They set the milestones themselves. They said, this is how we're going to figure out how we're going to measure our progress. Now, this is all pretty simple. We decided we were going to reward success rather than failure. And instead of funding the status quo, we said we're going to invest in performance. This is a strategy, as all of you in this room are aware, that most businesses and organizations already employ. But our performance management initiative does more than just provide the data necessary for this type of management. It ensures the environment for collaboration and cooperation needed to ensure the structural changes that we've envisioned. For the first time, as I said, all of Cook County's public safety entities are sharing the same data, using it to set cross-department goals and working together to achieve them. This is the first. And let me just point out, Cook County is basically in the business of providing health care and running a public safety system. 35 cents out of every dollar that we spend goes to our public health system. That's our hospitals and our clinics and our public health department. 39 cents goes to public safety. That's 75 cents out of every dollar. 3/4 of every dollar goes to either health care or public safety. And in addition, we spend almost $500 million on the jail alone. So we have a budget of about $3 billion. $500 million goes to the jail. So one of the things we said in public safety is not only are we going to reduce the jail population, but we're going to try to invest in alternatives to detention, both for young people and for adults. So we're focusing on more pretrial service initiatives and alternatives to detention. We're trying to figure out how we can reduce the population, both not only in the jail, but in the juvenile temporary detention center. We're looking at how we can pursue bond court reform. If you've ever been at bond court at 26th in California, one of the things that's astonishing is how quickly decisions are made and how many people, it would appear, for relatively modest bonds are going to be detained in jail because their families can't come up with the money. What I usually say is the jail is the intersection of racism and poverty in this country, not just in Cook County, but across the country. So we're looking at bond court reform, trying to figure out how we can set reasonable bonds for people, being sure that we're letting out those people who are not a flight risk, are not a danger to themselves, not a danger to the community. But we've got a lot of work to do in that area. Because we chose to move forward as one county, we're shaping a better, more responsible county. I'm committed to trying to make Cook County the most effective county in which to work and live in the country. We must fully realize our historically underutilized economic development capacities in order to do that. So I said 3/4 of our money goes to public health or public safety, but we've also got to pay attention to economic development. So the first thing we did was put together our workforce training, our community development, our capital planning, and our building and zoning departments, and said, this is all related. We need to try to figure out how we're going to have a more intelligent and forward-looking economic development policy. We began with this consolidation, but that wasn't the end of it. We said we're going to have to figure out how to focus on being more helpful to the local units of government with whom we have to work, and to the business community. One of the things I know as a teacher is that you have no real job security unless you have skills. And Mayor Emanuel and I have been working together on a number of things, but one of those is employment training. It will probably surprise you to know that in Cook County, our employment training activities are divided among 3 entities. There's one in the city of Chicago. Cook County runs one for southeast, south, and southwest Cook County, and north and northwest Cook County are in a separate, they call them workforce investment boards. So if you live in Wilmette, your employment training agency can't and won't tell you about jobs in the city of Chicago. And likewise, if you live in Chicago, they won't tell you about jobs in Northfield because they have 3 separate employment training entities. So one of the things the mayor and I are doing is combining those 3 entities into one so that all the people of Cook County have the benefit of access to all the employment opportunities and all the training opportunities in the entire county. That seems to make sense, both from the perspective of those who are looking for work and the perspective of taxpayers, because it's wasteful for us to do it the way we've been doing it for so long. Employers need to know that they will find an educated workforce as they move into our communities, and they also need to think about how they can employ people who live in the communities in their businesses, and that's an obligation of those of us in county government to help provide that assistance. As we work to improve the present conditions in the county, we can't lose focus on planning for the future. We have to figure out ways to be more competitive. You may have followed the recent work that's been done by what's called World Business Chicago, which is the economic development arm, broadly speaking, of the city of Chicago. There's also something called the Chicagoland Chamber of Commerce brought a group called OECD. I think it's the Office of Economic Cooperation and Development. And they both did studies of our region to try to figure out what our strengths were and how we could build on those strengths to enhance our competitiveness in the world market. Well, the county has to be a player in that economic development activity. We can't kind of sit on the sidelines. When I was campaigning, one of the things I found is I went to talk to people in the Metropolitan Planning Council or Metropolis Strategies or the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, those groups that look at the whole region and how we can compete more effectively. And what they told me was the county was not at the table with them, was not an actor, was not a player. The county has to be deeply involved in economic development activities to support our entire region. And I mean the entire region. When we're competing, as broadly speaking, Chicagoland, we're not competing necessarily against even just New York and Los Angeles. We're competing against London and Beijing, right? And Singapore. I mean, we're in a global environment and we're competing globally. We've got to figure out how we can work together to improve our competitiveness. So that means that it doesn't help if Chicago steals jobs from Winnetka, or Winnetka steals jobs from Chicago Heights. We've got to figure out how we're going to grow the economy for our entire region and provide more jobs in that way, rather than thinking we could just cherry pick employment from other places within our region. We've got to work, as I said, with these organizations that are committed to regional development to try to ensure a better future. As I said, I'm here today because the county's serious about engaging in these activities. We know that there's some hard truths that we have to face about where we are in the county, what resources we have, what we can spend, and we also know we have to change the culture of county government. But I think we've gotten a good start. I'm grateful for the support that I've received across the county for the work that we've done, and I pledge to you we're going to continue to try to reform Cook County government. I want to thank you very much for inviting me, and I'd be happy to take your questions.
Are there any questions?
I don't come here every day, so please ask me.
Please say your name and your village.
Robert Borderosian. I live in Evanston, so I'm one of the guests.
Okay.
Thank you for coming tonight. I'm also the Executive Director of Family Service of Winnetka Northfield, which is very small. But the whole question of sometimes having to let off people, you said that you had to let go of 1,000 people. How did that affect the services you provided, and how did you manage to maintain the level of service with that kind of cutback? Or did you have to also cut back services also?
Unfortunately, the county has long been a place with padded payrolls. You may have read recently about some of the difficulties we had in the medical examiner's office. So we sent a team from my office to the medical examiner's office to be there every day to get a handle on management of the place. I won't tell you the job category, but we discovered there was a job title in which there were 6 individuals. Only 4 of them were working on a daily basis. So when we came there, we said, everyone's going to have to work. One person retired immediately. The other person, after 2 or 3 days, and the initiation of disciplinary procedures started to work. But the county has been a place where there were a lot of patronage employees. And I'm not saying that everyone that we let go was a patronage employee. We were just so overstaffed that we had to make reductions in staff. And that's painful, but it's what we had to do because we can't afford the workforce that we've had historically. The county had about 24,000 employees when we came on board. It has closer to 23,000 now. And we will continue to reduce the workforce because we don't have any choice, given the resources that we have. And that's difficult, but it's what we owe everybody in Cook County, and that is to run government as efficiently as we can. So some of it, frankly, was just that we were overstaffed, relation to other units of government, or in relation to even not-for-profit organizations like at the hospital system, again, 35% of our budget goes into healthcare. If you looked at our hospital staffing per bed, it was about 1.5 times what you'd find the employee ratio to hospital beds in not-for-profit hospitals. So again, we were at a staffing level that was considerably higher than what you would find out in the community at large. So we've had to make reductions in staff, but we've made it clear to the employees that remain that we are going to hold them to a high standard of performance. And our goal over time is to continue to improve the quality of our service, even as we make reductions in staff.
Hi, Christine Walker from Winnetka. Thank you again for coming. You talk a lot about how your administration is embracing collaboration. And I'm wondering if you could speak to something specifically that you mentioned in terms of the overcrowding and the issues at the Juvenile Detention Center as well as Cook County Jail, which is, I'm sure you're very well aware, is one of the largest providers of mental health services in the country. What kind of collaborative efforts have you engaged with or finding resistance from in terms of schools who might say have a zero tolerance policy on behavior which might land a 14 or 15-year-old in the Juvenile Detention Center? And what kind of help can we provide?
Okay, a lot of questions. First, the Juvenile Temporary Detention Center, which used to be called the Audie Home. I still think of it that way. At the beginning of the last decade, so at the turn of the century, there were about 800 young people in that facility on a daily basis. Over time, thank God, that number has been reduced. It's now closer to about 290 on a daily basis, and it's been down to as much as 243. It's a juvenile prison. It's a terrible place for anybody who's ever been there. I visited shortly after I was elected, and I was deeply disturbed to see young people, teenagers that I used to teach, 14 and 15-year-old kids in shackles. It's very distressing. So one of the things we did in this budget, although we made cuts in lots of places, was put money into our juvenile probation and pretrial services for juveniles, so we could invest more in being sure that they got the best possible assistance from the county prior to going to trial, and to look more into alternatives like peer juries. I understand that this community, this township has a peer jury system. Move into things like that rather than detaining people in the jail. Very, very few of the kids that we put in the Juvenile Temporary Detention Center are violent or a threat to anyone else. Most of them are there for less than a week. 43% are there for a week or less. If a kid is in that facility for a week or less, they're not really a danger to anybody else, because after a week you let them go. I mean, you know. So we've got a lot of work to do there. On the mental health side, in this country in the 1980s, we made a terrible mistake. We said we were going to deinstitutionalize those who were mentally ill, deinstitutionalize them. We were going to create community treatment options for people. Well, we shut down the mental health centers, but we didn't create the community institutions to serve that population. And so now, it's not just here in Cook County, but across the country, our jails are our largest mental health institutions. So we didn't deinstitutionalize, we just transfer people from one institution to another. Thresholds, which is an organization that I have worked with in the past in my ward, came to see me early on, and they told me that roughly on any given day, a third, so roughly 33 to 40% of the people in our jail were struggling with mental health problems. So we know that we have a tremendous population in our jail that needs mental health services. And that's one of the areas going forward that we're trying to figure out how we can house people prior to their trial someplace other than the jail. $143 a day, roughly $52,000 a year to keep somebody in jail. Almost anything else we do, whether it's drug treatment or mental health services, is cheaper than $143 a day, and you don't get those services in the jail. So whatever we do out in the community to try to assist people who come in contact with our criminal justice system is cheaper than keeping them in jail where they get no service. So we've got some real challenges in both redirecting our resources and educating the people of Cook County about the impact of the choices that we've made in the past about, you know, getting tough on crime and deinstitutionalizing the mentally ill and all these other things that have had terrible unintended consequences in terms of drains on our resources and ill service to the people who need it most.